Really good. Like Glacier, but more so.
Yeah.
And so we're going up next is what's my understanding.
Yes, yes.
The next thing is the CAD and SDI update overview. And Maya's going to present for us, but if you'd like to move out to the audience, now's a good time to do it.
Take your cookies with you.
You don't have to.
Okay, thanks.
For me.
Oh, great.
Your favorite place to shop?
Okay, hello again. This is for reference a story map that any of you can go back and look at on your own off of the Montana CAD and SDI page from the library website. I wanted to start by showing you the workflow. First of all, the CAD and SDI stands for the cadastral components of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. You all will be more familiar with the Public Land Survey System, and the CAD and SDI is simply the digital version of the Public Land Survey System. So townships, ranges, sections, second divisions. So this is, gives you an idea of the workflow involved in the CAD and SDI, as well as the other data sets that benefit from an improved CAD and SDI. The CAD and SDI is something that is stewarded by the Bureau of Land Management, and about 5 years ago, the library decided to start actually managing the data because we wanted to be able to put out a product more quickly than the BLM was able to do. And the reason why that's important is because so many other data sets rely on the CAD and SDI. So many other data sets have geographical boundaries that follow the boundaries of a township or a section or meandered water, for example. County boundaries, cadastral parcels, and I might just clarify that even though the CAD and SDI refers to the cadastral components of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, don't be confused between what the CAD and SDI is. You can just think Public Land Survey System and what we often colloquially refer to as the cadastral, which refers to the owner parcels. So the cadastral application that you might be familiar with is, that's representing private ownership around the state. So I just wanted to clarify that. So basically, a surveyor goes out and collects survey control, and then that control is sent to the state library, and we use a process to make an adjustment using that survey control to the CAD and SDI. And then, once that's done, you can see in the lower left, the owner parcels or cadastral data that I was just talking about, or administrative boundary data like county boundaries, reservation boundaries, all of those are adjusted to the adjusted version of the CAD and SDI. So that's the process for how lots of data gets updated. So some of you might be familiar with the phenomenon of going onto the cadastral application and looking at your house in the aerial imagery, and you see that a property line runs right through the middle of your house. And that's because the digital data is not accurately representing what's on the ground in that area. And so this adjustment workflow is how we improve that data to ensure that the property boundaries are showing up where they actually are on the ground. If anybody has questions about that, feel free to ask me. And Evan, let me know if I'm straying too far from what you wanted me to present. But so this tab on the story map, it takes a while to load and everything, but it shows all of the, sometimes you have to zoom in and out to get the layers to load. But this is an overview of all of the adjustments that have, give me 1 second here, they should pop up. I don't know if it's the internet connection, there it is. So these are all of the that have occurred around the state over, you can see those in the different colors. And then other tabs, I add to this story map every year, so it's updated with every adjustment. And so I'll show you some other tabs down the line that show individual adjustments for each year. Something else that's useful to know about is this map. And again, all of this displays differently depending on what your desktop screen resolution looks like. But this map shows what the status of adjustments are. So there are some that are proposed in pink. These might be areas that the Department of Revenue has prioritized as areas of adjustment for them. The areas in green are all of the areas that we've already adjusted, and then the areas in blue, and there are just a few selected townships right now, are areas that are in progress. And these are all interactive. You can click on things and get information through pop-ups if you'd like to return to this. This tab is useful because it shows that, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. This basically shows where adjustment vectors exist. This helps you visualize where the data has been most adjusted. So areas that are red, like right here, indicate that that was a particularly large adjustment. So, large as in more feet. It adjusted, more in feet from one point to another than, say, an area that's in blue. So in 2018, we adjusted 240 townships, and there are over 4,000 townships in the state of Montana. And so for 2018 alone, we adjusted 240 townships across 25 counties. And you may already know that a lot of this work is done through MLEAC grants, which fund local governments to collect the survey control, which is then sent to the state library to perform these adjustments. And then just for your own amusement, you can, if you come back to this map, you can explore sort of a story map within a story map about how we collected additional information to do a big adjustment along the North Dakota and Montana boundary several years ago. It might be kind of fun to explore. There are some photos, and then I just wanted to show you one other thing on here, because this is not a time slider, but like a swiping tool to show before and after adjustments to the town of Dutton in Teton County. So on, let's see, the blue data, let me zoom in a little bit more, give you a little bit more context. So you can already see that the blue data represents cadastral owner parcel data that has not been adjusted yet. And if we slide over, you can see that it lines up a lot better. So that's the ultimate goal of this whole process. And is there anything else you wanted me to touch on?
No, I think that is the main piece there. The big thing here is that we've been trying to get to an annual adjustment cycle. I guess stepping back even further, I don't want to say taking over, but the library being doing a lot of this instead of the BLM, in addition to wanting to have more control over that cycle. The BLM had basically gotten rid of most of its geographers and GIS folks. They still had surveyors, but they sent a lot of this work off, and when they got it back, they didn't even have anybody that could check it. And we ended up doing a lot of that work, and even when we'd send it back to them and say this isn't correct, they didn't know what to do from there. And so we had a lot of concerns about the state relying on this for property ownership information. And so that's where the library stepped in and said, we've got a better workflow. We've been working now, it's about the fifth year of this workflow being implemented. We've been trying to do an annual cycle. We were getting close to that, I think, before the cuts happened. The result of the cuts, there were certain data sets, transportation, geographic names that we've just not been able to do any work on. Here's an example of a data set that it has delayed our ability to get these updates done. We are working very hard on them. The hope was this would have been completed early in this fiscal year. And there's a couple pieces. I don't know if you're going to talk about the adjustments from here, or if you're going to talk about adjustments to the other layers as well. But this is the underpinning. So as I said, this is the digital version of the public land survey. It is the survey base for then any of those legal descriptions that you see. So when you see it written out in a paragraph of township section information, it's all referring back to this. And so once this is done, it's another process in itself of adjusting parcels, boundaries, I guess those two data sets.
Right, public lands, conservation easements, and administrative boundaries and parcels. And yeah, that's a good point. That's also a lengthy process in and of itself.
Yeah. And actually, I should say, this adjustment, the PLSS or the CAD and SDI adjustment was done in November, December, is that right? And so then since then, getting those all done. But ideally, we'd be able to get all of this done. Well, the target we have had for the last several years has been able to do it on an annual cycle around July. We're going to be reevaluating now that this cycle is done to see how we'll move forward with that. If we can't do an annual cycle,
Jeannie, how many of the original surveys that were done many, many, many years ago have changed through the use of digital?
Well, hopefully most of those surveys are already in the CAD and SDI, and we continue to collaborate and partner with the BLM to ensure that new surveys that are being conducted by them, because they are the people who survey federal lands, that those are incorporated into this data set as well.
I guess that reminds me of a couple other quick things I'll make note of. This is one of the biggest ways and one of the big ways that we have the ability to affect the adjustment here. There's probably more than I can think of, but the big, if you go into Cadastral and you see parcels that don't align properly, it could be because we don't have good control in the area, in which case this would fix that. It could be, I suppose it could be original surveying error. I don't know how much that actually happens. More often is that the surveys are entered incorrectly when they're put in, so those issues could come up. And then, of course, the imagery itself could be off. So with those big potential issues with the locations of things, like I said, this is one that we have the most ability to control.
Just to put the additional context on this, it ties in directly with the previous discussion of the parcel fabric, because this is the constant ongoing correction really of or allows that parcel fabric to be adjusted and improved over time. So it goes well beyond cadastral into the administrative boundaries. One of the discussion earlier about the next gen layers and all these counties being interoperable and working with North Dakota, Montana, we're a rural state, and there are ranches and farms that are in the gaps that occur because where this hasn't been corrected. So it's also one of our salvations of if we don't get any more money for next gen, at least if every county uses the MSDI county layer that's built on this framework, things will line up well. And so it's really a real important foundational layer that, and I think it's also a real success story of MLIA that I think back years ago when the surveyors were kind of at a little bit at odds with GIS people, because every surveyor kind of works in their own environment, almost like their own little county of their space. So it's really a success story that we should be proud of.
I guess one more thing timing-wise that I'll mention is that we talk about doing an annual adjustment, but it is a slow process, not just doing the adjustment. If a county came at any given time, or someone came from local government saying that they were interested in seeing some adjustments happen, usually it's probably on the order of 2 to 3 years minimum to get that fully done. Particularly if they're going to go through the MLA grant program, they've got to submit a grant, get that grant awarded, do the ground control. So you're talking about at a minimum probably 1.5 years right there before it gets to us. And depending on when it gets to us, whether we get out in that current process of adjustment or the following year, it can take some time. But that is what, that's part of the reason that we try to get it in annually, because drawing out that process, you could imagine if it was a 2-year program of getting these adjustments done, and somebody came, we just started that 2-year program, and they got pushed off to the next 2 year, then you're adding additional years to that minimum time to get it completed. So, but that's what's, well, I was going to say that's what's realistic with the resources we have. I don't know that that's realistic with the resources we have. We have people that work incredibly hard to make it happen as quickly as possible, and I think we're lucky there to have the staff that we do.
I can't remember where I heard, was it MLA or something, but the other states around North Dakota, South Dakota were looking at this as well. Is that?
The parcel fabric model?
Yeah, being able, and I mean, they all participate in, they don't do this particular program of improving it, but.
Right. It was at the council meeting we talked about, was it Utah and
The state of Utah and the state of Montana joined in on it began as a pilot project to test the parcel fabric, and that was right before we hired Maya. And then when Troy alluded to how much she's worked on it, I don't think he did enough, because I think what we have done for the company at Esri itself is, because this was a pilot project and it was the first time they were ever implementing it on the state level. I mean, we were going in, we were editing registries on our computers. I mean, we essentially helped make that software usable on the greater side.
By breaking it.
Yeah, repeatedly.
Multiple other states.
There were many times when Maya and I are like, this isn't working.
It's interesting. It had been used on city scales before, and potentially cities with as many parcels as we have as a state. However, when you're dealing with an issue where it's all math, and you're talking about error when you're doing this adjustment process, when you spread that out over much larger geographic space, they were not even close to being ready for that kind of a challenge.
But it is now the model that the BLM is using in the western states. So Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, North and South Dakota are now migrating. So it's I guess one other thing to mention is that the software that the BLM used to use to do adjustments, GMM, was no longer going to be supported, so there was a need to find some other software to manage this data set. So it is now what the BLM is using.
Have you gotten much feedback from surveyors on this program over time, and maybe their opinion of it, or aside from getting money?
Well, they love it. There's a constant source of revenue for them.
One of the things that I've talked a little bit with Aaron and Evan about, and a little bit with the Emily Act, is that maybe there is a more efficient approach that we can consider under the land plan for awarding funds to do the adjustments. And I'm very interested and concerned about the county's opinion of doing this. You know, they do get these grants to do this work. but I think that we might look at the state as a whole and identify those areas that require the most adjustment or something like that. And rather than relying on the grant application process, just direct funds to complete that kind of work. And the funding model, and the grant funding model allows for off-cycle grants, just to see if we can't more efficiently get money into the cycle that would more quickly address some of the most egregious areas of the state and in a more efficient manner. So I hope we can talk about that when we're talking about the next landfill.
Yeah, and we have, I don't think we've ever looked at the actual numbers. Maybe we did. I would bet that control has, we've granted more funding for control than anything else.
Well, I mean,
over the history of the grant.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to, we have that calculated, and I can pull that if you guys are interested in seeing those numbers. In the beginning of the MLIA grant program, me being a theme lead at the time, I was admin boundaries. I had to write my own grant. So I myself was grant funded for a long period of time, MLIA grants. And then the council made the decision to kind of better the process and say, well, we're granting these out every year because they're MSDI layers and they're important. So it was a relief off of our shoulders where we no longer had to write our own grants annually. And so they set aside a certain amount to manage the MSDI. And then after that, we had the certain amount that we would then leave in the grant program. But I would say, Evan, yeah, you're right. I would outside of grants to steward the MSDI layers, that this is probably the number one. Because unless the BLM is doing a grant, or not a grant, unless the BLM is collecting a survey, there really isn't no other that we've seen money out there that counties are either they're putting their own money into it, or any other kind of funds that improves this data. So this is, as far as I know, like the number one program to improve the CAT MSDI, the digital representation of the PLSS. And a little more history is we were waiting 5 years for the BLM to update this data set when it was usually an annual thing. And so we had been granting, and grants had been coming in, and we had been waiting. And that's why we decided to make that shift. There was a lot going on with the BLM, and we were working with the Washington office and the Denver office. And that is one of the other reasons why, because it had been a 5-year gap, which is quite significant. It's too much.
So we've learned a lot from doing a lot of these grants. Some of the things that have come up in recent years, just the nature of the grants, a lot of folks are hesitant to ask for large amounts of money. And so we had a county that had planned a 10-year, they were going to request grants every year over 10 years. While that is nice as far as not depleting the MLA grant pool, that's very challenging for us. That means we have to revisit that area and update that area again and again, whereas it's more beneficial to us if that all came in at one time and we can do one adjustment on that. The other is just a lot of our grant process is about relevance and public benefit. We know there's relevance and public benefit, so this past cycle we had tried to streamline that a little bit as far as PLSS or CAT and SDI improvement grants, control improvement grants. We might have gone a little bit too far with that, but we do think we're onto something there as far as streamlining the cycle. Maybe that goes a bit further into a place where people can simply apply directly for control. But the other part of that is that we do want to be involved because we can look at areas and give some idea of how much adjustments to, or new control will improve adjustments. So if we're looking at an area and we see that it's more of a data entry issue, the survey's been entered wrong, we can advise them that, hey, just going out and collecting control isn't going to fix this. And we would advise against collecting control in that kind of a situation, at least until the survey information is complete. So just a few more things to be aware of. It's a very, very complicated process.
So is the model for decision making that we would work with the people who are using the data? Basically, it would go to the council to look at some sort of off-cycle grant or something like that, or whatever it would be, and then come as it does now from the council to the commission so that it would be the same model. It would just be adding another possible piece to the table.
Right, and under the umbrella of the land plan.
Yeah. So great. So it would still be the council had sort of the initial and primary role in proposing the work plan.
Right.
Good.
I guess I would also just add that in budget testimony to the legislature and talking about the lengthy timeline for getting the kinds of updates, I think that was one of the most compelling things that our budget subcommittee heard that then prompted them to think about other kinds of funding from the state library. They really recognized, they used the language that the mission of the library is changing. I think they more accurately meant that the work of the state library to meet our mission is changing, and this was the example that they looked to the most to recognize the need for more stable, more diverse funding.
This affects the Department of Revenue.
Yeah, we partner with the Department of Revenue on this. They have several cartographers that maintain parcels throughout the state. There's also several local governments that 5 counties that maintain their own parcel layers. And so basically we ask them to kind of stop what they're doing, and then we adjust the data and give it back to them. So this is a very deep partnership with the Department of Revenue.
It really affects everything in Montana that happens that has an X, Y, and Z coordinate.
Right. And there are so many policies and business processes in the state that rely on this data. We all know that. Many of those have some kind of cost recovery model associated with them. And when we talk about a study for House Bill 633, those are the examples we want to give the legislature to say, FWP, you're building a brand new hunt licensing application that provides land ownership information to hunters, and it's going to be drawing on our cadastral web service. Shouldn't a percentage of those hunting fees come to the state library to fund the data? You know, we talked about aquatic invasive species. We've talked about the MIPA planning documents. You know, there is a long list of those kinds of processes that I think we can direct the legislature to help them think about the different kinds of funding options that exist.
But it also, I assume, if we put a pivot up on one of our hay meadows, that shows up on the cadastral, and that property gets billed higher than.
I
think that, well, and it's a little deeper into the assessment. Yeah, I mean, the cadastral as the greater application, you would see the imagery behind that. And I think that the imagery is a totally separate layer, which is also dependent upon Next Gen 911, and that is very important for a lot of data layers itself as a base map and a reference. But I think that would be one of the key layers there is imagery.
Yeah, I don't know how, I assume they adjust their land unit layer to cadastral. Because those are generally subsets of parcels.
We know there is that Department of Revenue actually maintains an adjusted layer because cadastral is so bad that for their own processes they have to shift, and those are some of those priority areas that you saw in reddish or pinkish on the layer.
For the purpose of assessing agricultural land in particular.
So my quick wrap up is, the adjustment is complete both for the CAD and SDI as well as those associated layers for 2018. When the announcement went out, the story map was included with that, and given the complexity, I wanted to be sure that you knew about this story map. It's something that you're free to look at in your free time, but also wanted to give Mike a chance to give you a quick intro to it. So. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the URL.
Can you leave that open, Maya?
Sure.
The URL is in our agenda, or
I don't think it's in the agenda, but we can
Yeah, I meant to include that somewhere, but I'll get it to you.
Fascinating.
You forgot what you did for being.
So Aaron's gonna present the Land Commission grant awards to us.
Okay. So, there are actually a minor change on the document, and I wasn't able to get to your materials this morning to update that. It was pointed out to me yesterday. Under the first ranking one, it says the request for 1,2500. It's supposed to be only 1,250, not a new way to write a number. So I updated that and put that in there. And then there was a spelling error for recommended funding, and so I fixed that too. So just so you know that I did make that update, and we'll adjust that on your materials. But this is then the adjusted. This is the correct layout. So basically, this year we had a total of 16 grants submitted, 4 tribal grants. 2 state agency grants, and then the rest were local government grants. And we're actually able to award all 15 out of the 16. The one reason why we did not award the 16th was, well, number one, we didn't have enough funding, and number 2, it didn't meet the relevance and public benefit of the MLIA. So even if we had the funding, we would vote to not fund that grant. As you see in the stipulations section and recommendations, there are a few grants, and we usually do this every year, where we're taking things out that we didn't think was appropriate for the use of MLIA funds, or it wasn't well explained. So those have been removed, and so for the first one with Macomb County, it says do not fund the other, and other refers to a section in the grant budget itself. And then the request for funds for the county planner. And then if there wasn't any stipulation, the recommendation was just to fund fully. As you'll see, the 586 for presenting at the Make It Conference 2020. The MLIA program, as you know, MLIA grant program is extremely important, and we want to get the word out even more. So we're requesting that these grant recipients present their projects at the next conference, and I've cleared it with them, and they were okay with that. And we had a certain amount of money left over, so we took that, split it into 3, and gave it to the highest scoring of the category that they're in. So if we gave it to them, and we've never done this before, so it's something new. If we were to give it to the highest 3 scorers, it was all PLSS grants, and we didn't think that was going to be extremely exciting for a track. So we thought, well, why don't we give it to the top 3 in each category? So the Macomb County, we're giving them the $586 to pay for them to go to the conference, Shoto County under Next Gen 911, and then the Butte, the Silver Bow grant for updating their road attribution. So we had probably like 10 fewer grants than last year. Not really quite sure the reason for that, but it made for easier reading and scoring and just process in general. Because we did have a shorter time frame, given that the conference was last week, the Montana Association of Geographic Information Professionals Conference, and we always try to have the council's first meeting in coordination with that conference so that GIS analysts and other professionals across the state can attend the conference and attend our council meeting. So it kind of shortened our time frame. Usually we're not doing this until the 3rd week of April, but because of the hiring of John Kilgour, it really kind of helped expedite the process in general. And he's been a real valuable resource and just helping in general. Are there any questions about the grants themselves?
The only question I had were the recommendations. I didn't know what other meant. Is it the other $1,000?
Yeah.
So
It's a
explain that.
Yeah, it's a category in the budget, in the mandatory budget, and it's actually something that I'm going to consider removing from the budget because it's not very descriptive. We find things every year that we can do to improvements, but you almost have to wait a full calendar year before you can make any improvements like that. Another quick note that Evan had mentioned, we changed the process a little this year for the PLSS grants because we understood that there was a great public benefit and relevance. So we tried to make it easier for those grant applications to remove certain sections. And as Evan alluded to, we think we removed too much. But it was an interesting process in general. I think we're going to put a little bit more in, but we're starting to see kind of a tailoring of grant applications to, I guess, make the process more efficient and to get more applicants.
Am I remembering correctly that there were no tribal proposals last year?
No, there were quite a few, and they were all denied because they did not meet the relevance of the land plan. Or their other reasons.
And so these 4 that were funded, that were proposed and funded.
Yeah. If you recall, most of them last year were requesting RTN stations, real-time network stations, and that although we were exploring it at the time, it wasn't a priority of the land plan. It's not currently a grant priority of the land plan because we're still exploring the program in general, but it is under the land plan. It's a priority of my work to look into that further.
Interesting note on that. At least one of these, maybe all of them. There was some funding, I believe, found for those separate from our process. Wally found some funding for some of those core stations separate from this. And at least one of these is going to be doing some PLSS control point collection using a core station. So that actually, I think it might have helped it priority-wise because we're interested to see this will be the first time cores has been used in conjunction with control collection for our grants. So very exciting.
One of the things we're learning, this is only my 3rd year managing the program, is that some people take a shotgun approach to just looking for money, for funding, and apply for whatever they can, and with the hopes of getting something. And some of the council representatives on our grant review subcommittee, they're familiar with the process. They themselves work on grant applications as a private consultant or or do that themselves for other programs. So it was something that I was a little more new to.
Well, I would move that we accept the recommendations of the council and fund the applicants as presented in the table as per included in our meeting materials.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Did you get a second?
Yes.
Okay. Penny, thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that
I'd like
passes.
to abstain.
Okay, thank you. That passes, thank you, Erin.
Thank you. I'd like to just make one note. I wasn't able to do it while Maya was still here, but part of the workflow, if you ever hear us talk about Coors, which we just were, or RTN, RTN is a network of Coors, basically, and stations. That helps in the very beginning phases. So if you want to look at this adjustment workflow again, when they're out there collecting survey control, having a Coors network or having a real-time network limits the time in the field. So it really brings that cost down and gives you better precision across the state when you're in a network and you get a better location on the ground. So that's how that program, we're not going to talk about it today in the report. Are you going to do anything about it? Yeah. But we've been working a lot with stakeholders on trying to bring a network to the state, and so that's where that fits in this process.
Would that also speed up the process?
Yes.
So the currency would be better, in theory.
Well, it doesn't speed up our process. It speeds up the collection process in the field. So it can save time on either end of a collection by like 4 hours, which is significant.
No, I get that part. I'm just wondering if that would enable us to take and get the product up, so it'd be more current.
I'm not sure it would at this point.
It would cut cost of data collection.
Yeah, it could cut costs.
It could save time in a big picture, kind of like I was talking about the Park County grant, where it's spread out over 10 years. There's only so much time in a field season to collect data. So if you had to revisit the area multiple times and stretch that out over multiple years, then that's really going to mess with our adjustment.
I get that part. What I'm thinking about really is revenue. Because, I mean, if I understand that it's saving the surveyors and the people who are getting the surveys money on that front end of the process, but if that potentially speeds things up, but we still have constraints due to the limited number of people we have to take and do our end of things, then if there's somehow money in the process that could be used to fund extra people, extra resources on our end, so we could speed up our end of that cycle, then that would be in everyone's best interest. And if we allow that to be built without glomming onto some of that money, it's an error. And I think you have thoughts about that as well.
Oh, I do.
Yes, thank you.
And I would add that not that it addresses Bruce's point necessarily, but the time saved in collecting that control reduces the cost of the grants, so the grant money can be spread further and collect more control ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't hesitate to go quite this far, but Maya mentioned 4,000 townships in the state. If you just talked about getting, and it's not exactly 4 corners, but it comes out to something like 8 million just to get the corners of the townships. And ideally, we're talking about the long term, you'd collect every section corner. I don't anticipate in the current model that would be done in my lifetime. Now, as you start to add cores and reduce the cost, and we talk about really generally speaking, $300 to $500 a point. And that's because it's time to sit on that point to collect that data. If you reduce the time you need to sit on the point, you reduce the cost, you collect more in a short period of time. There could be other things that will reduce that as well. I'm confident that though the current model doesn't project something that will be done in my lifetime, technology changes will make that happen.
It used to take months to do a DNA, to fully spell out the DNA thing, and now it just churns right out. So maybe with any luck, maybe it'll happen. Simple one.
Okay, we're ready to move on to Joe and Tracy talking about continuing education for practicum supervision. Start with this.
Yes. So, basically, Commissioner Kish, I think, was the first one who brought this up with Joe. Just kind of talking to her about the value of awarding continuing education credit to supervisors who take on an intern, either through a school library media endorsement or even a master's in library science. And so Joe and Commissioner Kish worked hard to kind of come up with a plan and a proposal that matched what the Office of Public Instruction does. And so I'm just going to kind of let the two of you sort of speak, but go ahead, Joe, if you'd like to add anything.
Well, Ann and I, Commissioner Kish and I did spend a little bit of time looking at a couple of other models, specifically the way that OPI awards credit for similar work, so that we had what we thought was a really legitimate model to work from to assign the credit. And I think, and from my point of view, as your CE coordinator, I think it's a really valid learning experience for a librarian to have the responsibility of looking after an intern, a graduate level intern. The fact that it's also monitored and planned activity, so it's a real thoughtful experience, and it's overseen by a faculty member at a university. All those things to me represent a really valid learning experience. I think we should promote and give credit for it. I also think it's good for the library community to engage with people that are coming into service and give them that hands-on experience, so kind of a win-win. So this is the proposal we worked out and that we're presenting to you today to officially award credit, probably starting in the fall sometime, for librarians that accept interns into their library. So this would be any librarian that was seeking certification could gain credit. So we'll be adding a page to our manual that explains what's put forth in your memo. Do you have anything to add, Commissioner?
Sure. Currently, most of the continuing ed that we receive credit for the state certification is in the form of workshops, and those are great too, but this would combine experiential learning with that sort of traditional conference format, which I think that it's a nice mixture of those. I wonder if every time I take an intern, I always learn from that experience. And this experience is in particular with at least with the practicum students for teacher librarianship. The whole experience is framed by a list of really specific objectives that have been approved by the OPI. And actually we did get OPI to award continuing ed units a couple of years ago. So they've sort of already, we've kind of already worked together to iron out, exactly what needs to be met, which is how we came up with these really specific objectives. So we kind of piloted that with them, and I would expect that we would, meet back in a year or something and discuss what's gone well and what hasn't, and see if anything needs to be tweaked. Right now, Erin has 2 of my students. Has it been a learning experience for you?
It definitely has, and it's been a great experience because I've been able to understand we were talking about lifelong learning and how libraries promote that, and understanding how different libraries promote that throughout the stages of life. And it's great because it's the beginning of school and the next school. So the teacher librarians they're talking to one another because they're both doing their practicum with me. So how can the K1 school feed, what does the 2-3 school expect from the K1? And it would be great if the district could have that throughout the school, but currently it's just those two with the education plan for the students. And I think Browning schools are very different because we have multiple schools for individual grades. So one of the comments that one of the students mentioned to me was that in a school district our size, they may have 1 or 2 elementaries, and that gives them, maybe 2 or 3 librarians. And then they have different priorities, but because we have 5 different schools, we have 5 different librarians, all running individual libraries on their own. So, they really don't have the experience. And that was great for me to learn, what can I expect from, when I'm doing an early literacy push, what can I expect these kids to even come in knowing? Do they know how to use the library? Are they comfortable? Are my programs wild and out there? But I think it's been a great experience because we have been talking about ways we can continue this partnership beyond the practicum. So I've definitely learned a lot. They've got a couple more weeks. We'll pretty much be done by next week, but it's been a great experience for me in our community. So I would happily take another in the future if there's anyone else in our community who gets the certification. So we do need to take action on this. Is there any other questions? Would anyone be willing to make a motion?
We'll make a motion that we approve this.
Thank you, Ken.
Second.
Thank you, Jane. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Super. Wow. Very cool. Yeah, very cool.
And we will move on to the State Library Trust request.
This is a fairly modest little trust request. The idea was born out of a presentation that the Commission saw, I think it was last June, from Dr. Charlene Forsyth from the Montana History Foundation. At that time, she talked to the Commission about some funding that they had from a donor to celebrate Montana's Carnegie libraries through a kind of coffee table book that they were going to publish. And the proceeds from the publications of the book will go into a grant program that will specifically fund historic preservation on the 17 buildings that are Carnegie libraries in the state of Montana. The writing and photography for that book is completed. It's in editing at this point and will soon go to publishing. The book itself is scheduled to be available in August. And then to accompany the release of the book, the History Foundation is working on a traveling exhibit with panels for each of the libraries so that the Carnegie libraries, but also other libraries in the state, can host an exhibit that celebrates the impact that the Carnegie libraries had in the state of Montana. In visiting with the History Foundation and with Tracy, we decided that it would be a nice gesture for libraries and to show support for the partnership if the state library provided copies of the book to all of the libraries that they could then circulate in their collections. The History Foundation is hoping that libraries' friends groups will also purchase copies that they can then sell and retain some of the funds for use in their own libraries. And again, the proceeds, the wholesale costs from the books would go to fund the grant program of the History Foundation. So this is the request to spend up to $1,500. Again, a modest request, but it would allow us to purchase a copy of the book for all 117 public libraries and branches.
I have a question I just thought of. Does that include shipping? How are we going to distribute these?
Hopefully we would distribute them. I would suspect probably at the fall workshops would be would be the best way to do that.
And we'd let the libraries know that they're about to get a copy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Second.
That's wonderful.
Bruce, I think. Had the quicker second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks for your flexibility in the agenda today. We knew we had lots of staff coming and going with work in the conference, so we wanted to move this agenda around just a little bit. So we'll kind of wrap up with my report and commission goals and objectives. First, I want to thank Kenny for hosting a couple of different trainings for our staff on web accessibility. We've been learning a lot from him and his research. So he hosted one on document accessibility and another one on web accessibility and accessibility around our contracts and applications for providing online access to information. A number of our staff attended those, and we have them archived so that additional staff can continue to watch and make use of that learning. And we've taken a couple of initial steps to implement that learning. We have a template document now for any memos that staff need to produce that'll be available for commissions and advisory councils and other meetings, as well as a web accessible agenda template. Now those templates are posted on our intranet site, and staff are asked to make use of those to improve our document accessibility as we're posting things to the web. So thank you, Kenny. It's a step in the right direction to help us
Relatively easy stuff that we can all do.
continue to improve that effort.
Are those trainings on the Learning Hub, or are they just internal to the
I
state
think
library?
they're just internal.
You just have them internal, right, Joe? Is that the trainings from Kenny? Yeah.
But
But they're on the Vimeo, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, people can access them on Vimeo if they.
Oh, so it's just my link is internal.
Yeah.
The training is on our Vimeo channel.
Great. But it's something we could promote through Vimeo if we wanted to.
Sure. You guys could all watch.
That would be cool.
It was scintillating, wasn't it, Kenny?
God, I hope so. I don't know if I would call it that.
It was really good. You did a great job.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for doing it.
Scintillator.
Mr.
Scintillator.
And just a quick update on the Library Services Technology Act funding for FY20. Of course, the President's budget again calls for zeroing out that funding. There are two Dear Appropriator letters circulating through Congress right now. Both of those letters, one in the House and one in the Senate, call for LSTA to be funded at a $17 million increase. $17 million over the current funding would fund LSTA at the increased base amount that's called for in the Museum and Library Services Act that was passed by Congress last year. That amount is significant for us. Right now, the formula for funding that we receive has a $680,000 base, and then the remainder after all states receive their base funding is split out per capita. The $17 million increase would increase everybody's base to $1 million, and then the per capita amount would be funded on top of that. And of course, as a smaller rural state with smaller population, we benefit more from the increased base. So that's the request that's circulated in Congress now. It's actually less than the request that COSLA is asking for. When the Museum and Library Services Act was passed, it proposes funding LSTA at $232 million. The $17 million increase would take that funding to about $207 million. COSLA is asking that Congress fund it at the $232 million. There's been just some really crazy, unfortunate communication around these other asks this year. But at a minimum, the request to Congress is the $207 million, so including that $17 million increase to fund the base. I think people are feeling hopeful that Congress might, in fact, act on that increased amount. There's been some good bipartisan support. I heard
yesterday that almost 50% of the Senate has signed on to the letter. I haven't heard a count on the House side yet, but with the Democratic majority in the House, there's some encouraging movement there. So when we talk about a significant increase in LSTA funding, it doesn't seem as unrealistic as it might have a few years ago. Of course, we won't know with any certainty until Congress acts on the budget at the very, very earliest end of the summer. But something that we are hopeful for. And then Anne is going to come to Washington, D.C. And Erin, are you going to be in D.C. or in LA?
I'm going to be there for 2 days.
Okay. Where we coordinating Hill visits around ALMA to talk to them about the importance of the increased funding there. I do know that Senator Tester has signed on to the Deer Appropriator letter.
Yeah.
You have in your report documents the final reports from VANIC about the public awareness campaign. There's lots of metrics there about the different types of content that VANIC created for us. Of course, one of our challenges is sustainability. We don't have any kind of marketing staff, and people like Erin and Jessica do a great job of helping to do what they can to ensure that we have a social media presence and so forth. So to the extent possible, we'll at least sustain the content that we have. We had some sort of unexpected outreach coming from the Northern Ag Network because of the radio media that we received. We had a chance to meet them at some workshops early at the start of the legislative session, and they were really quite pleased that the library community chose to air radio spots with the Northern Ag Network and basically said, please contact us whenever you have need for promotional and publicity. So, for example, Erin did a radio interview with them to talk about the NLIA grant program when that application period was open. So that was another benefit that came from that campaign. I think in my mind, the biggest benefit that I've heard is talking to librarians who are now making use of the content. For example, the director of the Imagine Library Foundation said when she's meeting with donors, she's pulling out the talking points, she's pulling out the videos from that campaign and using it to help make the case for funding. And yesterday at the Chester Montana Library's board meeting, we talked about making use of the campaign materials to help promote that kind of trust. So I think there's a lot of great content there that will continue to be valuable as a valuable ongoing message that we can rely on. So that contract is now ended. I think they was mentioned the final invoice. I think they spent it down to within $10. At your February meeting, we talked about using some coal severance tax monies to hire a contractor to have help completing the Gigabit Library Toolkit for all public libraries in the state of Montana. Again, that's a toolkit that was produced by Internet2, a nonprofit that helps support digital inclusion through libraries, and the toolkit is a resource that helps libraries evaluate their hardware and software, internal connections, and broadband capacity. And so we now are in contract with a firm called Saddle Peak Technologies and a gentleman by the name of Chad Coley. He has really hit the ground running. I think we just signed that contract last week. Week before last, maybe? Week before last. And he's already visiting libraries. He will be at this conference tomorrow to visit with the Public Library Interest Group so that people can kind of have a face with a name. We're really asking libraries to open up their doors and be accommodating of him as he comes in and evaluates their technology and asks lots of important questions to help complete the toolkit on their behalf and also on our behalf. And then in addition to his work, we're working with staff to prepare a survey using Survey 123 that will go out to all of the state's telecommunication providers to get information from them about their internet service to libraries and available services in their area, proximity of fiber to libraries and so forth.
And again, the idea behind collecting this data is that libraries have good data that they can use to make the case for additional funding for their services. But also, we feel like we need to have better statewide data so that we can make the case for statewide programs for things like maybe it's E-rate matching dollars or state funding for broadband or funding for a hardware refreshment program. It was this kind of funding example that we talked with the trust board yesterday that really seemed to resonate with them. So that work is underway, and I think we're hoping to have that contract completed and the data available by the end of June. So it's a pretty rapid turnaround.
Do libraries, is it just local governments that can apply for this House Bill 622 grant funding, or can libraries do it?
It would have to go through their local governments. Yeah. You also, we also talked about using we did the trust request last meeting for hiring a contractor to do web rewrite for us, and I just wanted to let you know that that limited solicitation is underway. We hope to have responses back by the end of April, so we can get that awarded in May as well. And then I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about our initial thinking as we approach restoring some positions and having a little bit more money to spend. So we think we will, based on the types of positions we're talking about filling, with the statewide present law adjustments, be able to fill about 5 more positions. So if you think about it, we lost 12 people. It was a little closer to 10 FTE because some of those were partial positions. We've filled 3 positions since the layoffs, and with this funding, we should be able to hopefully fill about 5. So we're nearing full staff. Again, we did lose the 1 FTE through the decision package process in the governor's budget. So we're almost at full FTE with this ability to rehire. We also think we have some funding to increase the number of hours that one of our IT staff are currently working as a 3/4 time position. We'd like to bring that position to full time. And I've said all along, and our approach has been to look at the biggest pain points and to fill those positions first. So we filled a reader advisor position, we filled an IT position, we filled an administrative assistant position. The next biggest pain point is the ability to do some of the GIS updates that we talked about. We haven't updated transportation and geographic names. We're about 10 months behind on the CAD and SDI adjustments that you just heard about. That's because we lost half of our GIS analysts in the budget cuts. And so what we're talking about doing is, rather than hiring sort of the professional level GIS analysts, to hire more GIS technicians that would be responsible for the data editing. I would add that that's something that we had been talking about even prior to the budget cuts. We knew that we had a large professional staff of GIS analysts who were doing a lot of data editing kind of work and had less time to devote to things like the coordination and the consulting and direct work with our partners. So by filling at least a couple of GIS tech positions that can do the editing work that our staff are now doing, it would free up the analysts to do the more professional level coordination and planning work that we would expect from them. So those are 2 of our priorities. We also lost a library tech in the layoffs. Jessica Edwards and Jim Kammer have no library tech support behind them. And we want to do more to promote our services to state agencies, to the public. We've talked a lot about the idea of growing government information centers and public libraries. Those are examples of the kinds of services we'd like to support if those professional staff had more technical support behind them. So we're talking about a library tech to help with that kind of effort. I think another priority for that kind of position would be someone who had some metadata skills that could help us think about how we integrate our collections more effectively. For example, we've talked for years about how we could geo-enable our state publications, that kind of thing. We think someone with a more robust background in making use of GIS and typical library metadata can help us with some of those kinds of priorities. And then the other priority that we're talking about would be sort of a data manager analyst position for us. We lost the state data coordinator, and Tracy talked about that a little bit. Pam Henley took on some of those responsibilities. How the Montana State Library approached that position is fairly different from how other states have approached that position in the past. We really had an administrative assistant that was just collecting statistics from libraries and providing some technical support and assistance to those libraries in collecting that data. We don't really have someone on staff who's done a lot of research and analysis of that kind of data. And then similarly, we've sort of had this halting approach to our own data management and reporting that we've been talking about now for a couple of years. We've begun doing more data-driven planning and analysis, but we don't have a great grasp of the kinds of data we need to be collecting, how we're managing that data, analyzing that data to continue to improve our services. And then in addition to reporting to the Commission, we have all of this other reporting work that we do, including the LSTA reporting that Kara has to do on an annual basis. Through a data management analyst, our hope is that we can have someone on staff who really has a deep understanding in helping us do that data-driven planning and analysis, data collection, data reporting, data analysis that will continue to help us plan for, evaluate, and deliver our quality services, and also free up staff like Kara who are having to do all of this data management and reporting work in addition to all of the other responsibilities that we take on. So those are some of the preliminary ideas that we have in mind for the positions that we would like to fill. If funding would allow, we'd like to have some additional capacity to support web development work, so that's another one that's on our list. We're starting to look at different job profiles and a recruitment process. If the funding holds by the conclusion of the session, we would like to start working with state HR to begin that recruitment process with the idea that we would have as many of these positions filled by the first of the fiscal year as we possibly can. And then we'll also have to think about this additional funding. Again, it's $100,000 in the first year and $150,000 in the second year. And as I said earlier, we're going back to those things that were cut first. So, for example, we know we cut the Heritage Program contract by $230,000 over the biennium. So that would be one of the priorities we would be looking at. We cut some funding for library development for the OCLC and the Montana Shared Catalog contracts. We've been able to backfill a lot of that with the coal severance tax funds, so we have that funding available. There's other things that we cut our IT budget, for example. So those are the things that we're considering when we look at that additional funding. So we're not wholly restored, but it's a good step in the right direction.
If I may, I'd like to reflect that even 2 years ago, before the cuts, while we were at least on paper fully staffed, we really didn't have staff sufficient to meet our responsibilities even then. So we may be coming back to where we were 2 years ago, but I guess I don't consider where we were 2 years ago to be adequate staffing. So that's what I think about that. So could you talk a little bit about why on your list of anticipated sort of first hires there is not a public, and I'm not suggesting these, I'm just saying if you share your thinking, public information person, why we not hiring using some of these funds to hire a shared catalog director, et cetera, some of those other kinds of needs.
I think a public information officer, if we could get a part-time public information officer, that would be one thing that we would recommend. We only ever really had a quarter-time PIO to begin with. There's a little bit of a cushion there in the funding that we've been looking at. The 5 or so positions I described don't fully expend that statewide present law adjustment. So there could be an opportunity to hire a part-time position. We could even get creative with some of our funding and use some MLI funds, for example, to help fill out a position. One of the other things that we are going to be looking at is how far below target market salaries many of our people are paid right now, and considering whether or not there's an opportunity to use some of those funds to give appropriate raises to get people closer to where they should be paid. So that may be a priority. With regard to the shared catalog specifically, this is my thinking and my thoughts alone. We've sort of drawn the line in the sand in doing taking on new responsibilities, and that includes adding new libraries to the shared catalog until we have the resources to do so. And in my mind, that means the resources to also support the services that were cut. So until we are whole, and that in my mind means whole across the agency, I can't see adding new and taking on new responsibilities, including growing the shared catalog. That's my thinking. With regard to the shared catalog director position, I hope that if we are able to hire a data analyst, we can take some of that LSTA reporting and coordination responsibilities off of Kara's position and put it on that position and give her more time and capacity to do more in that shared catalog director role.
Thank you for sharing that.
Jenny, after the cuts of 2 years ago, that really kind of hit everybody and the staff as well. Do you feel comfortable as you can, with the support and optimism from this year's legislators that you can go ahead and look towards rebuilding?
I do, absolutely.
And continuing forward and consistently between now and 2 years from now with a message that we batter them constantly?
I think you meant badger them.
Batter. Boom, boom. You can put that in the minutes.
In all sincerity, I do. I think the message was loud and clear. We were even hearing from some of the very conservative of the legislators prompting me with questions about this changing mission of the state library, because they recognize and support that need for the data and services that we're offering. So I do feel very confident. We have begun to draft, and it's just in draft form, but a graph that tries to demonstrate our line of thinking when we talk about this need to make whole our current services that are not whole before we take on new responsibilities. And sort of, the line is the 2017 base, the 2019 base that's still below that 2017 base, and the gap that's still not funded because we are not yet whole, what it's going to take to make us whole and make those services whole. And then beyond that, what is it going to cost for us to take on these new responsibilities? So, is it $150,000 a year to support next generation 911? At least $100,000 to support a real-time network. and support for a government information center, and support for the shared catalog, and all of those things we're identifying as new services, and with those new services has to come the funding. But again, in my mind, that can't come before the other services are made whole again.
My only thinking about, I think that's great. My only thinking about that is that the shared catalog has always been a priority, has been long been a priority. And it's not a new program. It's not nothing new. It's just that we've run out of resources to continue its growth. So I guess I wouldn't quite say it's not like doing RTN support, which would be kind of a new activity. It's an existing activity that we've just run out of capacity to meet demand. So in a way, it's, I'm concerned about not exactly abrogating, but are having to take and put a moratorium on adding libraries when that was always our promise. I know it's your concern as well. But it's not exactly like that's a new thing. And, even back before the cuts, we really were understaffed in terms of being able to support that service. So again, to my original point, we never were whole. And, we can talk about getting back to those levels, but we were still lagging behind basically on the backs of our employees with all sorts of programs, including the shared catalog. And I'd like to identify the resources necessary to fix that and move on so we can keep our word of saying, you want to join? Welcome aboard. I know you don't disagree with that, or I believe you don't disagree with that.
So I have a question about, after the cuts, we talked about reorganization and how we weren't going to ever be able to go back to 2017 because we reorganized ourselves. Are you guys still in that mode of thinking, or are you just, we want to get back to 2017? I guess I'm not sure if I'm hearing the original, we've made the restructure, or, these are the lessons learned from the restructure, therefore this is what we're proposing.
Well, a couple of points that I would make, and I'm not sure if this gets to your questions, but if it doesn't, tell me. We closed the reading room. We lost FTE permanently. We have no plans to reopen the reading room. In fact, we saw people walking around in the reading room yesterday, like maybe it's finally going to get an occupant. I don't know. But we merged the talking book library into the digital library, and I think that's been a really successful move. So that's not going to change. As I said, we'll be hiring GIS techs rather than GIS analysts because we think that's a more efficient use of our FTEs. So all of those changes, reorganization, are continuing. I think there's room for us to think more about how we efficiently make use of our staff and our services, and we'll be having those conversations as we continue to think about these kinds of positions that we fill. When I talk about getting back to 2017, it's these core services that are on hold that we are not offering. We have a responsibility to maintain the transportation and the geographic names. They are themes within the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure that have gone untouched for 2 years now, that we need to have some capacity to support again. The fact that it took 10 months to do the CAD and SDI updates, I'm very, very proud of the staff and how hard they've worked, but that's not our desire to be that far behind in doing those kinds of updates. So when I
work harder.
So when I say, we have these things that are going undone and that are not yet whole, it's those kinds of things that I'm talking about.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear because I feel like that was a big push, is that even if, in 2017, even if we receive the funding back, within 6 months, the agency has changed,
Yep.
and it won't be back to what it used to be. We're trying to run a little slimmer, and just as good management practices. So thank you for answering.
Yeah. questions for me about anything that I talked about or didn't talk about?
I appreciate the care in which you're managing, keeping all these balls in the air. I understand how complicated it is.
Well, I think we'll all be very relieved in a week or two when they go home and we sort of know where all the chips have fallen. There's a few texts out there with some additional promises, but nobody's counting them at this point.
Well, one of the things that you faced is, I don't want to insult any of the legislators, hardly at all, but but that's not the library that they think it is. It's a whole different function. It's not the library that's on the corner of the street at home.
Yeah.
And so every day is an instruction day to them about what we can do here.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing process.
One thing I forgot to mention, Representative Hamlet from Cascade County is getting the Library Champion Award on Friday night for sponsoring House Bill 633.
Smooth move.
Oh, he's been great. Jeez.
This isn't on anything you said, but under the State Library report, at the very end of the digital library work plan, there's the very last bullet points are about the cadastral update, or the CAD and SDI update, and there's a link to the story map there. So you do have a link.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm not sure when we should revisit our goals and objectives, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to discuss them. As we know, the reporting is kind of on hold, but you can see there's some change happening within the library there. And then the collaboration is kind of become, I don't want to say stagnant, but we're not really moving forward with it. I think just going through the legislative session, you can really tell how much we partner with the Montana Library Association. We have very similar aims of wanting to provide services for the people of Montana. But I'm not certain if today is the day to go over maybe thinking of new things we can do moving forward, or are those being done below that goals and objectives on the line here with the bylaws update and the finance committee. So I just thought I'd give you guys a chance to weigh in on that, or if we wanted to maybe for a future agenda put the potential of having a working session to go over potential new goals and objectives, or adding to what we have here. We've had those for about 3 years now. Yeah, the same 3. So what do you guys think?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's not really, there's nothing really on the agenda, but I think we should really think about having a working session where we can, or we have a little more time to go over it rather than in the middle of a meeting.
So like a work session at the end of your June meeting to talk about your.
Yeah, I think so. And when we see the agenda again, it'll prompt us all to think about that and get prepared.
Should do it at the beginning so we're not sleepy.
Rather than springing on you.
Instead of saying,
Come up with a new goal, guys, right now.
We should do it at the beginning of the meeting so that we're not worn out.
Or the day before the meeting.
Or the day, then that would be a 2-day meeting.
That would be a 2-day meeting. Your math is pretty good.
My high school math teacher wouldn't agree with you.
Okay, so noted.
Okay. As you saw in the bylaws update memo, that there really isn't anything to specify subcommittees and ad hoc work groups with our goals and objectives. We had working groups with those. but it wasn't very formal. It was very kind of time sensitive. We're going to work on this for this long, which I think is why the two goals and objectives are still in yellow, because it wasn't necessarily something we were going to work on long term. But if we wanted to think about the long term, the longevity and the success of what the state library can be in the future, we really need to think about finances. So in order to get to the finance committee, we have to change the bylaws to specify how we create new committees and groups. So I don't know if anyone has any discussion, or if we want to just do action on, oh my gosh, words just flew out of my mind. Accepting the bylaws update.
Yeah, and if we accept the language presented for the update, then we immediately form the finance committee, or then would we need to wait?
We can immediately form.
Okay.
So is there a motion to accept?
Sorry, so which is the bylaw, which is the language, the
It would be
underlined?
number 6, yeah. Is the only changes being proposed to the bylaws, or is the subsection now numbered number 6 in all 3 subsections?
I move it be accepted.
Wait a minute.
Good question, then, after my motion.
I'm just wondering what, I mean, B doesn't really get us anywhere, does it?
So with B, I think that means that every time we want to add a group, this is what it's saying, that we have to go and change the bylaws again.
Mm-hmm.
And
But for a permanent standing committee,
Not for working groups.
not for work groups, but a standing committee, you would add those into the bylaws by amending the bylaws.
So what this does is put in the bylaws the commission's power to form permanent standing committees. Seems pretty straightforward.
Where would that happen in the bylaws?
It would happen right here under 6B.
Oh, you mean where in the bylaws would the standing committee be added?
Yeah.
That's your question?
Yeah.
in section 6.
Yeah, I think it would still be in section 6, so you have a as a standing finance committee, a future standing, whatever, if there's a future, I don't know, policies committee, it would be B, and then B would move to C, etc.
Okay. And the ad hoc work groups, they don't have to be written into the bylaws at all.
Right.
And we pretty regularly have task forces, it seems like.
I guess those are ad hoc work groups.
And I think this is just a way to spell it out. This is our bylaws, rather than maybe someone coming in and saying, I don't agree that you guys just form this group. We can say, well, it's been drafted and approved in our bylaws.
And while there's no guarantee that having a permanent finance committee will take and make us, wealthier and better stewards, I have to say that the subcommittee structure of the OCLC board was really powerful in terms of making efficient use of commissioners' time, and also it just helped us kind of more aggressively sort of pursue more complicated agendas. It was a good structure. It worked really, really well. And I just see it as an opportunity to basically get more mileage out of us, the commissioners. Do more good for the agency.
Spring! It's spring!
It's tied in the recording of the meeting or something. You can try to log on to the online meeting, yeah.
So have we had,
Second. We need a second.
I would happily second this.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This passes. So we will go directly into talking about forming that finance subcommittee.
It looks to me like the chair,
My iPad, sorry. Please leave it off.
but the minutes reflect it's the most technologically advanced among us who's having the most trouble with this technology. It seems to me that the power to appoint is in the hands of the chair, Madam Chair.
I don't want to just appoint people, I call for nominations.
I would like to nominate myself to serve on the committee. I manage a budget. It's much smaller than the state library budget, but I use a lot of creativity because it's so small. And also because it's so small, I was reading that anticipating financial problems, so I do that all the time, and then deflect them. They don't go away, you just send them to someone else.
You said you deflect them?
Deflect,
Or, okay,
yes.
not reflect them. Okay.
So I'm going to nominate myself.
Okay. Well, we can have up to 3 members on this committee. Are there any other nominations? Is it any verbal?
Speak no evil.
I say, please verbalize the nomination.
Are you volunteering?
I'm volunteering.
Okay, thank you, Jamie.
I would volunteer if there was, if you,
She's nominating herself. She should give a speech.
Hey, just be glad I was silent for a minute. Or 30 seconds.
I would like to serve too if there's room, and if there's no one else wants to jump in.
You want to do it?
I'm happy to serve as well. But
Then I would back down.
but we have no, well, so who makes
You can
the
do it.
decision?
No, that'd be
Are
4.
you making the decision
I
or
would
is
make
there
the
a vote?
decision for
or-
the appointment.
I think she's basing it on our speeches.
I'm out.
I'm out.
So you've got, no, you've got,
It is so appropriate. We're all getting kind of punchy. Horse Stew is next, huh?
It's possessed.
I have a hammer in my bag.
We want Ken on there.
So I'm going to appoint Ann, Kenny, and Jamie to the finance committee. And then through recommendation, if there are specific staff members you feel like should be a part of this, or through the commissioners appointed to the finance committee, if there's anybody you feel like should be included, we can include some outside people as well.
And I do think, certainly Melissa and I will staff the committee. And we've sort of been wrestling with additional people that we might want to serve. We've talked about people from the governor's budget office, for example. If you have recommendations of people that you think have, financial expertise, investment expertise, can help us make the case for funding, other kinds of recommendations, we're open to additional suggestions. We have lots of tasks for you already to start, so.
I resign.
Well, I think just with our presentation this morning, there's a lot to think about with full severance tax.
Yeah.
I do want to point out that I'm unfortunately going to miss the June meeting.
Okay. So we'll give you all work. Let's see. Well, I think that is up for that. So, an update on the Trust for Montana Libraries.
Don't you have to, that's the charter?
Oh,
You have to take action
okay,
on
oh,
it.
for the charter, okay. I was doing the equipment
Yes.
as well. So we do need to take action on the charter. Thank you, Marlies. Is there a motion to approve the charter?
Oh, I missed that completely.
So moved.
Thank you, Jamie.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you, Kenny. Any further discussion about the charter? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, now we'll move forward. Thank you, Marlis. You can tell where my brain's going. All right, so, Jenny.
Thanks, and I certainly want Jamie to step in if she wants to add anything. We had our second meeting of the trust board yesterday, and Stu is here from Library Strategies as well. I think the board is making great progress. To date, we have articles of incorporations and bylaws filed with the Secretary of State's office. We have and we just filed with the IRS. The 501c3 status is now in file. So all of those legal documents are moving forward. Yesterday, the board adopted some additional policies like a conflict of interest, a whistleblower policy, and some of those other kinds of formulating documents. The kind of one pager that you have here is something that was drafted specifically for distribution at this conference. And Stu and some other members of the trust board plan to be at the Friends and Foundation interest group tomorrow afternoon to talk about the progress that we've made. This is an effort that we've been talking about at Emily now for a couple of years. And so it's great that we can report that it's a real legal entity, and in fact we have a few little donations that are coming into the trust already. So the next step is to open a bank account. There's an effort out of southeastern Montana to challenge all of the libraries in the state to make donations to the trust. So that's nice of them. From this one pager, Library Strategies is going to move forward with more of a marketing effort, including press releases and other kinds of pamphlets or promotional materials. We don't right now have staff capacity to help maintain a website, but we'll put together a small web presence that we can maintain. And then Stu and his team are working on a list of grant opportunities and prioritizing those grant opportunities with the focus on grants that would be for capacity building, specifically trying to have some funding for the first few years for some staff or contractors that can directly help with fundraising for the trust. One of the things that we talked about yesterday was the formal relationship between the commission and the trust board and the legal mechanisms that are in place for the trust to, when they have money, grant to the state library. And I think the board liked the idea of a memorandum of understanding that would exist between the trust board and the commission with something like an annual work plan that identified the funding priorities that would be proposed by the commission and the board, the trust board, with input from groups like the Network Advisory Council and MLIAC. And that way there's an annual review of the funding requests that align with the kinds of statewide programs and services that we hope to fund through the board. We'll be working on, I think, some drafts of what that might look like for the commission and for the trust board to consider. And then also for the next meeting, which we scheduled for June 26th, will be a draft development plan for the board to consider for their fundraising efforts. Okay.
Stu, did you want to say anything? Stu has just been, he and his team have been phenomenal to work with. They're so fortunate.
Just an overview. I think we kind of had a 4-phase project outline for building the new trust foundation, and I think we're pretty much at the end of phase 2 of all the structural elements of building a plan, building a board, having the policies in place, all of that. And so the next phase really is PR marketing and fundraising to get the trust functional, and then following that, hopefully by the end of the year, there would be my hope is to leave you with a fully functional library foundation for the state, so that beyond, of course, with all the policies and procedures and basic PR material and initial fundraising done, so that there would be an actual person who could help run the trust and some kind of office structure, but all of the also fundamentals. So in some sense, we're about halfway there, but really the next stage is more active PR and fundraising.
I don't know if it's appropriate to comment on this, but one of the things that pleased me the most was understanding that the money that we can take in for the trust will benefit libraries across the state, and possibly even we can encourage people in their local areas to donate to their own libraries. So it's not like we're trying to take money away from the local libraries, but to create an assistance program and help them as well. So I really like, and the group seemed to like that theory, in spite of the fact that I grew up with sharing is for losers.
So this is a fact sheet. Is there a charter somewhere for the trust?
There's a mission and bylaws.
Does that state what the relationship of the trust is to the commission?
Doesn't really state to the commission, it states to the state library, so that it specifically is to complement the work of the state library. So it's not to the commission, it's to the state library.
So is there anything in that wording that explains, the commission is an advisory body to the state library and to you, right? Is there anything in the trust's charter that indicates that it might also be an advisory body? I'm trying to, there's potential conflict here in the relationship.
I would clarify, the commission is not just advisory, it is governing to the state library.
Okay.
And the trust is a separate 501c3. And so I think this MOU is going to be necessary to spell out the relationship between the commission and the trust board. One of the things we talked about yesterday is having this kind of document in place to document that intent for future people that fill our roles in the future, so that there's that clear understanding that, as Stu said, that the trust is here to complement the work of the state library and the statewide mission of our work, not to go off and fundraise for something else. But ultimately, it is a separate nonprofit with its own board.
So when I go on to the Secretary of State's website and look under the incorporation papers, it really does describe a relationship with the state library. So I assume that there's articles of incorporation that we filed.
They're there. They're filed.
So I assume that also talks about this relationship.
It's basically the same wording as the bylaws. So typically, the where you get into more details is in the MOU, and that would state have a section on philosophy of what the relationship of the nonprofit is with the governmental entity, and then there would be a longer section about roles and responsibilities of each organization, and you may get into the board level of that board versus commission. I think what we talked about yesterday is that would be a pretty much standard structure that wouldn't change very much year to year. But then there would be an Exhibit A or addendum or a last piece that would talk about the financial arrangements each year of what the trust would be supporting at the state library and how those funds would be approved and accepted by the commissioner of the state library. It's kind of up to you as to how you would accept those funds and where they would flow. So I think that MOU would be more detailed and clarify the roles and responsibilities of each board rather than kind of big picture what's in the bylaws and articles.
So are the articles and bylaws available now to review?
Jenny has. Yeah, so we are a fully incorporated legal entity incorporated in the state of Montana. And what was filed actually this morning after the board meeting is the 501c3 paper. So it is a legal entity. We're just waiting on our 501c3 status from the IRS.
Can I find that link on the state library website?
No, I'll send those to you. We had a conversation about that yesterday. Because it is a separate legal entity, I didn't feel like it was appropriate to have those documents on the state agency website, but I'll certainly share those with you.
Thank you.
Just one last comment is that the MOU would typically be approved by both boards, and I would imagine it would be the library commission that would approve that document. So, and we'll be drafting that and probably review at the cost level at the I would hope I think it's important to get that one in place pretty quickly, or at least have it under discussion. So it could come to you for approval this year.
So I'd like to remind you guys that Jamie's our representative for that. So if you have any concerns that you would like her to bring up, just make sure to pass them on. And that way the commission has, our full presence there through Jamie. So, thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Thanks for volunteering.
Yeah.
If I could make one more comment, I think one thing that was clarifying yesterday was, and I think the board was enthusiastic about this, was that the trust could serve as a fiduciary agent for grants that cannot go to a governmental entity. And so really, as a legally incorporated entity, we can do that now, even though there was concern about what capacity we have to accept that. So Tracy was there, and I think the staff was really interested in their grant opportunities that really can't come to the state library, but the trust, even as a legal entity now, could accept grant funds and serve as a fiscal agent for grants. So even out of the gate, there's some opportunities for funding coming into the state library that really weren't possible before. So it's kind of exciting.
And why it really should be separate, two separate entities.
Right.
Of course, the trust is not yet a 501c3, so donations may or may not, depending upon one's tax status, be as deductible.
Yeah.
Right, and we may need to wait to get the final approval for 501c3 before grant applications can come in, but there now is an expedited process for 501c3, so I'm hopeful 6 weeks, something like that is the turnaround at the moment.
I was thinking about the donation half of it.
The donations are not tax deductible, but we already decided to send out thank yous so that people get appropriate recognition at this point.
Does the board have decision-making authority about how the money is spent?
Yes.
Does that concern you at all?
No. I think we need to get an MOU in place so that the commission is comfortable and the trust board is comfortable that this is it's a partnership, but we entered into this process understanding that our intent was to create something that was separate from us.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see the value of that. I would just throw in a word of caution. My understanding is that there was a similar arrangement at University of Montana many years ago, in the 1990s, I think, where a Friends board was developed, and there was conflict between the Friends board and the dean of the library, which over spending authority and how money could be spent, and eventually it led to the dissolution of the Friends board.
we hear about those kinds of situations on a regular basis. And so I think there will be an abundance of caution when we approach creating this MOU, so that we are all clear and comfortable. Some of the examples that I described yesterday for the board of how I see approaching the funding requests. And I use the Gigabit Toolkit example. We have a statewide study underway. It's had input from our staff. We've discussed it with the Network Advisory Council. From that, we might come up with some ideas for some kind of hardware refreshment program, for example, and have that kind of process vetted by the Network Advisory Council. It would come to you as the commission to determine if that's a priority for our work, and then under a plan under the MOU with the trust, we could then go to the trust and make a formal request of the trust board for that kind of funding, and that at least on an annual basis, under this umbrella of an MOU, we're having a formal conversation with that board about exactly what we would ask them to fund. And the trust board, I think, really liked that idea as a model, and the idea of having this formal agreement with the commission that spells out what we would fund. And I think one of the reasons they liked it is that it was something that they could talk about in a tangible way to actually do fundraising around.
And to update or revisit the MOU every year as differences come in, whether it's the funding that comes in or the priorities that are at this facility.
If I could comment, there's risk involved in this. Because a private, separate organization has been set up. And so I think what we're trying to put in place is a lot of structures to minimize the risk. MOU is a big one. I think also coming out of the MOU is that each board annually review, the commission and the board annually review what the relationship is and really understand that. You absolutely don't want the trust trying to run the state library. And the flip side, if the commission tries to run the trust, you minimize its fundraising potential. So it really needs to be a hand-in-glove relationship. And I think it's really critical that the state librarian and a representative of the commission serve ex officio on the trust board, and that there be an annual sort of board professional development or reminders annually on both sides of what the roles are. I think the flip side to the risk is the enormous opportunities. And you heard one today about your management of funds that are on the public side gets a very minimal return. Well, if those funds were in trust, you'd be getting 5-6% return, and you'd be solving problems already. In the same way, the 501c3 status will allow grants to come in, and then there's the whole realm of other kinds of fundraising. So it's not one. This project isn't one without challenges and potential risks, but it's that can be minimized if it's managed annually and an understanding of the boards and policies and procedures that back that up. So that's one of the things we're trying to put in place, is to minimize the risk and maximize the opportunities. But there will always be risk of your private organization going rogue. Believe me, we get a lot of contracts to solve those problems. So that's a big focus, and I think for me, the level of engagement of the trust board in talking through some of those issues yesterday was really welcome and actually really smart, and came up with some really good solutions on the trust board already. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Bruce, you are on. If there are no other questions or comments about the trust.
On the trust?
No, if there are any, if not, then you
Okay,
are next
there
on
we
the
go.
agenda.
I'd like to thank the Network Advisory Council for their careful look at it, and staff for kind of taking this idea out to libraries from around the state and chatting with them. And bringing us back such an interesting list of comments and concerns and support and so forth and so on. Just a couple general observations before I'd like to make. A couple of the comments came back that made me think that the commenter was saying that this resolution is about libraries. It's not really directly. It's really about Montanans, about people who live in Montana, and then secondarily about the libraries that provide those services. But it's I guess the distinction in my head for that is that several years ago. I was with Tracy and with Kara. We were at the Ripple conference, and it occurred to me that they're really, that metrics don't really make any difference. They are really meaningless unless they're actually measuring whether we're moving our users' needles, not our needles. And so then I've been thinking since that point, kind of hard about how do you do that. And my takeaway from that has been that it's really all about. It's all about what kind of, to the degree to which our library users are able to use libraries as tools to help them be more fulfilled, more educated, more successful financially, calmer in mind, whatever their individual goals are. And so some of the language that is in this reflects the thought that both the strategy and the measure are linked or welded to the user, not to the library. And so that kind of goes from that. I also had some discussions with, a number of discussions with Anne online and with Evan and Tracy and Jenny about this. And so some of this came from that. Much of this came from those discussions. And from discussions with Jenny and Commissioner Arnson about sort of schools and opportunity and hope, et cetera, that sprung from an article that we all read from the New York Times about, I think, Wolf Point schools. So that's where this all comes from. It really is focused on the user in terms of kind of considering what is needed to be done. The only changes in what we discussed last time are in your copy here, the third discussion draft, Monday, March 4. Things are either stricken out or underlined showing new stuff. The biggest change is in the notes, which were really just intended for the commission. I'm not sure that it's useful or wise to take this to be more generally, but just to basically try to expose the thinking behind some of this stuff and hope that someone can come up with a better, cleaner way of doing that. And so from discussions, everyone stumbled over the whole notion of distributive justice. It didn't really advance the argument, so that all got crossed out. So that's what I know about that.
I'll just share, if I might, my sense of some of the feedback we've heard to date, and we're still in a public comment period about this resolution. We've had a meeting with library development staff, and we'll have another one with the digital library staff, but the feedback from the library development staff was a thank you to the commission. They felt like they come up upon challenges in their work to promote library services that they feel like their position in trying to advance those services is bolstered by having a very clear statement from the commission about the importance of the work we do, why it's important, and how it manifests itself through good library development. And so I think, they expressed a sincere thank you for having a document like this. And then similarly, in visiting I was at the South Central and the Broad Valleys Federation, where we had a discussion about that. And some of those comments are also included in the summary comments that you have here. Similarly, they wish to express their appreciation. For example, one librarian said that this is a document that they can take to a budget presentation to their county commissioners to talk about why the work that libraries do is important beyond just the services themselves. So I think the idea behind this resolution really is something that people within the library community are ready to embrace.
I've sort of said, I think it's a little bit audacious for the State Library Commission to stand up and sort of say, this is what we believe and this is the why behind the mission of the State Library. But I think everybody that I've heard really has embraced that and also see opportunities for us to then carry forward with this resolution to really speak very specifically about what we mean by the useful information infrastructure. To Bruce's point about us never having been fully staffed, I think we can use this to help us measure what would a fully integrated, fully supported information infrastructure look like, what resources are necessary to truly make that a reality. Another example that we've talked with staff and other libraries about are using this resolution as essentially the benchmark or the mark in the sand for a rewrite of the public library standards, making those really aspirational standards with this kind of resolution and the intent behind the resolution as something that those standards strive to achieve. So I think there's some real concrete examples of work that can come out of this resolution that really helps the state library live its mission in supporting the GIS community, the work of libraries around the state.
It just basically says that we're all in the same boat and we're all in the same boat together, and that libraries have a role in helping us get done what needs to get done in our lives. And if libraries aren't able to do that, then the state library has a role in helping those libraries get to that point. I think it will. I think if it is adopted by the commission, I would expect that it would take in either inform or to some extent drive the next sort of cycle of planning for the state library. That would be my intent.
Oh, sorry. We still are in comment phase, so are the questions that you raised the focus of tomorrow's presentation?
Well, that was what I was going to recommend.
Yeah.
So we have our sticky wall, and the public comments are structured around some specific questions about the resolution that we've been posing as we've been talking about this with various groups. So our idea is that we would hope that maybe Bruce would facilitate the conversation tomorrow at the session, but then we would have the sticky wall with places and paper that people can write their comments and thoughts about the resolution. We can collect those through the conversation with the commission tomorrow morning.
I think that would be excellent if you would do that, because we've introduced the resolution at the Federation meetings. There's still one left to go, right?
But 2, 3.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
But there are a lot of people who have already been exposed to it, and they did offer feedback. They were very forthcoming, but now that they've had time to, so for some people it will be new, but for other people they've had time to think about it and maybe some potential practical applications for it, and we could capture. This might be a great time to capture those.
So do you think, Anne, that it's appropriate to consider adopting this at this meeting, or should we take and table it until the next meeting?
Gosh, I think we have to table it because not all of the commissions have weighed in, or the federations.
Well, I don't think technically we would have to. I mean, I think the commission can do, if the commission decides that this is something they want to do, I think they could do it, but you're suggesting that we wait.
I think it would be better to get the buy-in, because so far I think every federation has had overwhelming buy-in, I think. But I think it would be great to get that from across the state.
Sounds good to me.
Or is that? So does that slow things down?
Well, I have to admit, I thought that was the plan all along, wait until June, so I didn't think it's an action item on the agenda. And I agree with Ann, I think it's right to make sure that each federation has the same opportunity to weigh in.
It sounds like a plan.
So with, maybe with updated comment summary, we can discuss and make that an action item for June. That's
Cool.
okay with you, Bruce? I know you're pushing to get it done, but.
No, I don't think there's any particular rush. I think it's more important to do what Ann says, to have people have a chance to when I looked through the feedback, I didn't see anything in there that really drove, that made me think, darn, missed that. But certainly worthy discussing. Did anyone else see any comments that made them kind of rethink what we had done on draft?
I know Tracy and Suzanne have also been a part of public comment so far. I don't know if you guys
And I haven't heard anything, but I think we have a couple of our more potentially conservative federations, representing more conservative areas to weigh in, and so I would like to hear from them. And not only hear from them, but have a chance to discuss it and the ramifications.
Sounds good.
So you feel comfortable leading the conversations tomorrow?
Yeah, with your help, absolutely.
Okay.
I can make things up at the drop of a hat.
What else does anyone feel like they're not prepared to discuss this resolution, their access resolution tomorrow? Does anyone need more time or more discussion?
So how about this? One, just to structure it. So after tomorrow's discussion, I'll talk with staff and perhaps Ann, if you would volunteer for this, since you've been engaged with this before, and maybe we can see if we need to take and update the draft which is being circulated, and sort of in preparation for the discussion at the next 3 federations, but also for being added to the agenda. And if not, then we would just be discussing the current version. Does that sound good? Would you guys help me out? You as well?
So, but just to make sure everyone knows what their role is tomorrow at the conversations with the commission, I think what I'm gathering is that, so Bruce will introduce it, and then I know in the past when we were doing, we did the task force, we had the sticky notes up, and we each stood by a sticky note to people came up and had questions, and we tried to help answer them, but they'll also add their comments to the sticky note. So I just want to make sure everyone feels comfortable being on your own next to a sticky note to answer questions.
I don't be able to do it quite in that manner because of the sticky wall. It's a wall, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if it was going to be around the room or.
Yeah, so
I have really big sticky notes.
Cool.
So it might be more of a facilitated group discussion around the different questions than individuals asked.
Okay.
We'll take a look at the room and figure out how we can best sort of make sure we get the best conversation possible.
Yeah, it's in this room.
And what's the sticky note?
This is the sticky wall?
It's like a,
Do you remember when we did the strategic planning at your library in Browning? Obviously, this is for those of you who are new. And he had that wall that was purple and it stuck to the wall, and then you put pieces of paper on it. That's what it is. Yeah, and it is quite large.
Wherever you get facilitators kind of gummed up in the wall.
Ginny was starting to stick commissioners.
It's going to be pretty sticky to hold in.
You stick commissioners up.
You can lift me up there, I'll stay.
All right, so that's actually good to know. We're going to be in this room tomorrow at 8:45. Okay, I was like, is it right at 8:45?
And I think we'll want to, if anybody wants to get here a little bit early, I suspect it'll be in theater form, but we typically like to move the chairs into a circle. Sure. So that we can get here a little early and do that.
I'm from Hawaii.
And then 2 more items really quick. Just going over our calendar.
Little woman.
In May, let's see. Did anyone want to commit to go to Golden Plains? Looks like that's the only meeting.
Kenny had
here's the
planned to
agenda.
go, but the meeting date got changed, so he wasn't available.
Right there.
So
Tap on it.
Where's that one?
Way
It's because you've got this damn non-Apple laptop. Oh, interesting. Aspen's misbehaving in part over here.
I don't have a
FYI.
copy of the resolution,
Oh, okay.
so if somebody has it,
Oh, here.
send it to me. Thank you.
Send.
So Tracy, are you still going out to Golden Plains?
Yes. Amelia and I are going. And you can ride with us. We're going to stop and visit libraries along the way, whoever wants to go. It's tough. It's tough to make it to Wolf Point.
Is that a Friday?
It's a Thursday.
It's a Thursday.
Yeah.
I was psyched to go.
I know. You'll make it someday. It's great to go.
I just like
So
to.
if someone could host me overnight, I could hop on the train. Or would it be overnight? I think, yeah, I'd have to stay overnight because I
Yeah,
wouldn't
you'd
be
open
there. I'd get there the day before.
Yep.
I don't know anyone at that point. So.
Yeah, you can get I hate to volunteer someone.
If we'll see you, we'll ask her.
Okay. And I would be willing to do that. Let's see, so then I will be going to Pathfinder for Benton's. There's also an ACT meeting in May. There's also the MSC meeting in May. I don't know if it's on this, but I just got reminded of it. And then Ken will go to the Tamarack meeting. I think that's all of the meetings in May. We'll have our commission meeting on June 12th. Then MLAC right after that, and then at the end of the month is ALA. And so Anne will be there representing the commission. I will be there. My brother just a month ago decided to get married that Saturday. No, my brother Dylan. So I'm performing their ceremony, and so I have to leave ALA. I'm really sad because I was planning on being there for Monday. So I'll be there Thursday and Friday. And then the other thing that is coming up that I'm sure you guys all got the email about potentially having our October meeting in White Sulphur Springs. So,
The library?
The new library. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
do you have
So-
any additional?
Well, I think just around that meeting, we'll want to talk about if folks want to maybe go over to White Sulphur the night before or do any kind of social in White Sulphur. There's
First beer's on me.
there's a few good places if folks want to go over there the night before. And in the past, we've worked with libraries to have a little reception or social or something like that. So if you guys are interested, we could coordinate something like that.
So is that definite yet? That it's going to be in White Sulphur?
Well, I wanted to make sure that the commission liked that idea, but I have, we are tentatively on their calendar to host it there.
Great. I'm in.
I'm
The-
excited.
Be fun.
The new library is literally across the street from the All Seasons, or what has been the All Seasons Motel, and then the spa, Hot Springs, is down the way a little bit within walking distance. And if you do want to come and spend the night, I would suggest calling soon to get rooms at, especially the spa.
Okay, we'll have Marlis get those reservations made for folks right away.
Sweet.
All right.
Might have to have a party. It's about all I'm good at.
So, is there any public comment on any matter not contained in this agenda? Any other business and announcements?
I would like to apologize to the commission and thank them for their travel this spring. I'm unable to travel until probably midsummer, and so I just appreciate you guys carrying more than your weight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I missed all the winter ones.
So we will adjourn at 2:47.
Erin, what day is the Pathfinder? May 16th?
13th. Oh, no, that's.
Is it the 16th?
16th, yeah, and that's a Thursday.
If we're not moving cows, I might come up.